I grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, for most of my life. My early childhood was definitely positive. My mother and I, we were pretty close. My dad wasn't really around very much. He's a truck driver, and he would be home maybe once every 2 weeks. But it didn't seem like there was any problems going on ever. When it was me, her, and my dad, we were a pretty happy family. Nothing really seemed wrong, usually, but I didn't really see it. But there were problems, for sure. There was one night that I was just kind of doing my own thing as a typical kid. And then just all of a sudden, my mother started yelling at my dad. I'll punch you! When I first heard it, I was in the other room, and I just peeked around the corner, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why. After all I've done? She was standing over him, and while he was sitting in a chair, he was completely silent. He didn't try to stand up for himself or argue back or anything. You're gonna just sit there? And then she threw her ring across the room. Here. And that scared me a little bit. I saw my mom's face during that moment, and her facial expression just completely changed into something I had never seen before. And I was so confused. I was just so angry at my mom because I had never seen her like that, ever be mean to my dad over anything. I didn't understand it. Get out! Get up and get out! Get out! Later on, my mother told me that she found out that my dad was having an affair with another woman and that he was about to actually have a child with her. And I was completely shocked. She was, blaming this other woman. She was also gathering in her mind that my mom and my dad were meant to be together and nothing in this world could separate them. That was the beginning of my mom's obsession, really, of my dad and the other woman being together. And things just kind of went down from there. So this is me and my little sister Megan. It's the day after she was born. I think it was the very first time of me holding her too. I was just ecstatic. I saw my dad walking down the hallway with my little sister in his arms, just the biggest smile on his face. It was a really good day. I was about 9.5 years old in this picture. That was what I had always wanted, was a close sibling. And I was just really ready for the future. That's kind of what I was, was in my head all day that day. I am trying my best to hang on to the good memories because it seems like the majority of her life was just it was all bad. And I couldn't do anything to change it. Sorry. I couldn't get her out of that situation. I just couldn't get her out of that situation because I was a kid myself and I didn't know what to do. And I didn't realize how toxic it was in that household before it was too late. It was after my sister was born. My mom told me that she planned on having the baby in order to keep my dad, because she had the feeling that he was kind of trying to be on his way out of marriage, out of the house, and to leave my mom and me. So she had to find a way to try to lock him in. So it was only a year after my sister was born that I was just in my room doing my thing. All of a sudden, she kind of bursts into my room in tears and sits down on my bed with me. And she told me my dad pretty much just made it official, like, I'm leaving, I don't love you anymore. He hadn't really loved her since I was born, and he only stayed because of me. She blamed the breakup of their marriage on this other woman.
She's a monster.
This other woman was just trying to pull him out of his family to be with her. At the time, I did want to comfort her. I just didn't really know how because I was so young. I knew she was upset, and it wasn't just her fault. But then my mother's facial expression changed quite a bit.
She needs to know how this feels.
She started talking about the other woman.
Put her in her place.
And what she wanted to do to kind of get back at her, to hurt her. And what she told me was she had the idea of throwing like a big box of nails in her driveway. My mother was escalating with her anger and her violence.
Somebody has to.
I was very scared whenever my mom told me, because even though everything had gone on between my mom and my dad and the affair, I've always thought my mom as being this loving, caring mother that would never try to hurt anybody else in any sort of way. For my mom to think of revenge, is this her true self? Almost every day she would be complaining to me and venting. She just couldn't let go of the idea to hurt her. And it had me really, really scared, honestly, because I didn't know what was going to happen next. So this picture is of my grandmother and my baby sister, Megan. At this point, I think my sister's about 3 months old. And it's right around the time that my grandma first got to meet her, too. She loved her new grandchild. So she definitely wanted to cherish the time that she had as a baby. We actually had to move in with my grandmother after my mom and dad divorced because we couldn't afford to live on our own. And it was definitely rough at the beginning, trying to adjust to it. Not only that, it was just my grandma was always in pain from her health problems and what she was going through. And, she was getting older in age, in her early 70s. I mean, we loved each other, and I already know that she would protect me in any way possible, but we could never afford to move out of my grandma's house. So that kind of built up inside of my mom, and it definitely led to my mom and my grandma butting heads a lot. My sister definitely didn't have a great childhood because of my mother. She just gave in to her anger and punished her, spanked her, yelled at her. It was a daily thing.
Can we go play? I'm busy.
My mom didn't want to go outside with her to watch her and play. My mom would always just put it off, like go sit down, play with your toys, watch TV, just don't be in my way, don't get on my nerves. It always seemed like my mom was at her wit's end, and anything that my sister did, it was wrong. My mom was always screaming at Megan.
What did I say about toys on the table?
We were always walking on eggshells because my mom was so frustrated and angry all the time.
Can't you just be quiet?
You know, she was a very serious woman whenever she would get on to us. And I hated seeing my sister go through that. So I felt like I couldn't talk to her or bring anything up to her that might frustrate her even more because I felt like she was gonna lash out at me.
And you?
I was scared of my mom.
Don't you know better than
Oh, it got to the point where I didn't know how to be comfortable in the house because I didn't know how my mom was gonna react. I did love to see my dad because it was something different. I could get away from my typical everyday life at home, and we usually went out and did something. He would take us out to eat and maybe go karting or something. But I always dreaded having to come back home because for the rest of the night, my mom would not stop asking about him.
How was it?
Like, what exactly did y'all do? Did he say anything about me? What did he say?
What'd y'all talk about? Not much.
We were trying to visit as father and daughters. We weren't talking about my mother. And that made her feel really, like, I would say enraged, you know? And she wouldn't let it go.
Good night.
She wanted to know every single detail of what we did and what we talked about, and it had nothing to do with her. And as time went on, you know, at first it was the anger and blaming my dad and my stepmom for everything that happened. And she still couldn't accept that, you know, my dad was never going to come back to her. She just went deeper and deeper into her depression over it. So for Megan's birthday, we decided to do it at a little park in town. We invited my dad, and I didn't have any idea that my stepmom was going to be there. Almost the entire time, my dad was talking to my stepmom, and that really frustrated my mom. My mom was very, very tense because she was frustrated with the whole scenario and she couldn't do anything about it. But it was very unhealthy how much she was trying to hold on to him. And she just shouldn't have been doing that. Towards the end, though, whenever we were wrapping it up, my stepmom, I think she had said a few words under her breath. You know, I'm not sure what exactly it was, but it was towards my mother.
Is she always like that?
And it just completely enraged her. And she went to the back of our SUV and pulled out a big wooden rod that I didn't even know was there, but she had it in her hand.
You got something to say?
Ready to strike her with it, and it really scared me. It scared everyone.
I'm right here.
You know, I couldn't stop her from doing anything. I was just, you know, pleading to her, Mom, please don't do this. And my dad noticed that, and he, you know, threatened to call Department of Human Services on my mom. And my mom just kind of raced back in the car. And my mom still has that wooden pole in her hand. She threw it pretty hard back into the SUV, and it almost hit my sister in the head. It was just very scary to me, and I didn't know what to do.
Get in.
I was upset because I was scared of what just happened and what's gonna happen next. I had no idea. I don't think we ever really talked about it after that day. It was just kind of shoved to the side after that. This was the first time that I really saw my mom act this way, as violent as she did, but it definitely wasn't the last time. So eventually my mom did start dating again. She got on a few, dating websites and met a couple of different men. I was definitely happy that she was trying to move on from my dad and not just spend all of her time at home. My mom felt like my grandmother was always in some kind of pain because of her health. So it became more and more where she was asking me to babysit every night, every weekend.
You look nice.
I had kind of a long-term boyfriend in high school, and we hadn't seen each other outside of school for a couple of weeks. So I asked, hey, I haven't seen him in a while outside of school. Can we hang out? And my mom, there was no hesitation about it. She said, no, I'm going out and doing things with my boyfriend. I tried to tell my mom what I wanted and how I felt, and she just snapped back at me every time, saying that I need to do what I'm told.
It's not a discussion.
She told me that I needed to take responsibility, but with it being my sister, it wasn't my child, it was hers. I felt like it was supposed to be more her responsibility. She put her needs and wants above mine. So eventually she wouldn't be gone for just the evenings. She would be gone for a couple of days. And I would just have to keep staying home with my sister, and I couldn't really go out and do anything. I did want her to be happy, but at the same time, she had been gone so often, and I felt like I was running the house. Over time, it just kept getting more and more intense between us. After a while, me and my grandmother agreed that he needs to be out of our lives.
What is this?
It was very difficult for me because I knew that she would just push my opinion to the side.
Mom, he's not good for you.
You haven't a damn clue what's good for me.
But I really did communicate with her that I don't think that he is right for our family.
You brat!
It just doesn't sit right with her, I guess. And she got pretty furious with me at that moment. She started screaming at me, which really frightened me. I was trying to defend myself, but I couldn't do it without crying. I couldn't keep my emotions from pouring out.
Why are you doing this?
It escalated pretty quickly.
Shut up!
And then she pushes my seats. I tipped over, but I almost hit my head in the side of the fridge. It was very shocking to me. I really had no words after that. I was just flustered by the whole thing. I was definitely thinking, how can my mother do this? She didn't apologize for what she did, and I was really kind of giving up on having a good relationship with my mother. I was at the point where I didn't really trust my mother. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say to her to get her to try to change. That day in the kitchen was really the first time that she was ever that violent towards me. And I was very, very deathly afraid that it was going to happen sometime soon again. After that incident, I didn't feel safe in that house. During that time that she was gone, it was honestly very, very peaceful in the house. It was just me and my grandmother. You know, I went to school every day, we just came home. I mean, I missed my sister, of course, but overall, it was pretty nice, honestly. It was just me and my grandma in the house for those 2 weeks. So when she came back, I was a little disappointed. I expected her to just grab some more of her things and go back with her boyfriend. And that's what she said that she was doing at first.
Looks like we're here to stay.
But she had admitted that she was actually moving back and that her boyfriend had basically kicked her out. So my mom asked me if she could sleep on my bed, and she was all dirty and sweaty and she didn't want to take a shower. And I asked her to either take a shower or I can change my sheets again. And that made her just snap immediately.
How dare you speak to me that way? Don't want to help your own mother. Hey! Look at me when I'm speaking to you!
She basically was like, why did you say that? Why are you treating me this way? Why don't you just go live with your dad? And I was honestly okay with it. You know, I wanted to be out of the house. So I went ahead and started packing my things. And that was one of those times that I, stood up for myself.
Hey.
And she didn't like it.
Listen to me. I'm speaking to you.
And it made my mom so angry that she grabbed an empty beer bottle that was on the side of a table, lifted it over my head, and threatened to hit me with it.
Go ahead.
At that point, I'm so scared that she's actually going to do something to me, and I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't want to stay and find out.
Go ahead. Just run. Get out of here. Don't say another word.
I knew that this house was a very toxic place, and I knew I needed to get out of there. I was 18, and I had no obligation to ever live there again. So I took my chance to get out of there, and I knew it was for the best. I realized the best time was when she was picking up my sister from getting off the bus, which gave me about a 10 to 15-minute window to go in and just grab my things and leave. So that's what I did. During that moment, whenever I was in the house, I noticed that my sister had actually ran past my mom to get home, and I was able to, tell her, hello, I love you, I miss you, and I'm sorry things had to happen like this. I'll see you later. And that was it. I do think about that moment a lot. That was the last time I ever got to tell her I love her and hug her. It was hard to leave my sister there. I knew my mom didn't treat her very well either. Looking back on that moment now, it makes me, really sad that was the last moment. I know I could have come back, and, I feel like I could have done more, but at the same time, I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to get around my mom and, just do better for my sister.
I'm on a once you marry, you're married for life, okay? Your dad and I have been split up for 7 years, and a woman is coming in the middle of both of us, okay? Which is the devil.
She's acting like a completely different person than what I knew. I felt like maybe I should record this in case something does happen and we need some kind of explanation or, you know, something to show like how it was leading up to what had happened, even if I didn't know that that was going to happen the very next day. I didn't quite understand him because he was very distraught, and he was saying, you need to come to your grandmother's right away. Something happened. And I'm like, what happened? I don't know what's going on. Is there an emergency? And he is in tears. I just didn't understand what was going on. And he briefly told me that your mom killed your sister and your grandma. Just in that moment, I could not feel anything. I didn't believe it was real at first. I was like, am I dreaming? And I feel like I'm melting. I can't feel anything. I can't think of anything else. I'm just bawling and in tears because I don't understand how any of this could have happened. So I go ahead and call my dad and I tell him what happened, that my mom killed my sister and my grandmother, and I've never heard my dad ever in tears until that day, and I hate that I had to be the one to tell him.
Y'all cleared the house before doing anything else? 2 people covered the house and 2 people drove the dog? Might help us if we don't know where the at.
In the basement, have our advice. Continue now. Pointer job.
I'll go ahead and roll. Yes, sir. Who's got cover? You have anything on you?
Yeah, I'd never seen that before.
All right, stand up.
I could see all the blood all over her. Just, yeah. Never thought I would see that. After she did what she did, she went underneath the house to try to set the rest of the house on fire. It seemed like she knew what she was doing because she had that plan, and it seemed like she was possibly trying to cover her tracks.
I've never been in care of cats in my life.
No, get used to it.
Me and my mother, the night before everything happened, she was telling me that there was an emergency and I need to come home right away. And I was telling her, well, I'm sorry, I'm not coming home right now unless there's someone that's injured or dying.
Listen to me, Kristen. Come home. Listen listen to what I'm saying.
I cannot come home right now, Mom.
She was trying to get me to come home more than anything. And I don't exactly know what for at the time.
I'm dead serious, Kristen. If you just listen to me.
You're making absolutely no sense.
Yes, I am making sense.
And I told her time and time again, no, I'm done with living there with just under that toxic roof. It wasn't healthy, and I didn't want to be around it anymore. And she seemed to be getting completely outraged because I wasn't listening to her.
You're just making no sense.
To you, I'm not making any sense, but to me, I know I am.
Me and my dad spoke about my mother because my mom had called him prior to calling me to, she was trying to get his help to apparently come get the Christmas tree to help her put it up. That was a lie, and we knew that after everything had happened because the Christmas tree was up in the house. She was ultimately trying to get both of us there. Never in a million years would have expected her to do what she did. This picture is of the funeral. I had 2 pictures printed out. When my favorite picture of my sister that I took, and really the only decent picture that I could find of my grandmother. This day, it was a very hard day for me because, it was me trying to say goodbye, and everyone else trying to say goodbye, but I never actually got that chance to tell them bye. There's a lot of people there that I didn't know, so I was still really uncomfortable, but thankfully my family that was around me made it a little easier to deal with. It was definitely difficult to do.
Were you just trying to relieve her of her pain, I guess? Is that what you're...
I guess, I don't know. I was just hurting because I know she was hurting every day. I just hated to see her in pain.
But Megan wasn't in pain.
No, Megan wasn't in pain, but I was irritated with Megan because...
Were you planning on doing anything to me, though?
I don't know, it just came, Kristen.
Why were you trying to get me over the night before?
I don't know, I was just angry.
Why were you, trying to get Dad over?
I had hopes to getting back with your dad, I don't know. I still love the man. To me, it was like she was using him. She doesn't love the man. She took my life away, Kristen, and everything that ever amounted to me away.
I know my mom has always hated my stepmom since the day that, she found out about their affair. It didn't really make sense for her to bring that up when all I was thinking about was, I was grieving about my sister and my grandmother that I just lost, and I was talking to the person that took them away from me. It shows me that she never really truly cared about anybody but herself. I hate the fact that my sister was running away, that she saw it coming and she couldn't get away from it. You know, my grandmother, I believe she was in bed when it happened, and I think she was asleep. So, you know, I hope it happened fast for her and that she didn't suffer. But my sister, I think she went through a lot of pain in the few last moments that she had, and I hate it. I sometimes wish that my mom just had to go through the same thing that she put them through, just so, you know, she could really realize the pain that she caused, because it's not fair. They did nothing wrong. I want her to hear from me that she completely ruined my life and she flipped it completely upside down, and she is never going to get that forgiveness from me, even if she were to beg. So this picture is of me and my little sister. I believe it was the first day of my sister going to kindergarten. It was the first day of 10th grade for me. So we were both pretty excited just to have each other on the bus going to school and, you know, getting to share that little bit of experience with each other. Yeah, we were really happy. It was a bonding moment for me and her. But she didn't get to do a whole lot of growing up, whereas, you know, I did. And it makes me really sad that she didn't get to. It is hard to reflect on these moments because, you know, she is gone now. But at the same time, you know, we were happy in that moment. And, you know, and I didn't want it to end. I feel like we both missed out on a lot. I mean, if I could go back and talk to her one more time, you know, I would probably tell her I love her about 50 times before I couldn't anymore. You know, she just had so much life and it was taken away. I hope that people that watch this, you know, really try to pay attention a little bit more to their loved ones and make sure that they're doing okay. Because you really never know what's going to happen, and you never know who you're going to lose in just an instant. I'll have my moments where, you know, I'm grieving a little bit more on some days than others, and you can never predict it. You know, it's just going to happen when it wants to. But I know I'm going to be okay, and I know I'm going to, you know, live a good life after everything that's happened to me. I'm going to make it that way.
What's the address of your emergency?
I need an officer. There's blood all over the floor. He took off with his soon-to-be ex-wife.
My life today, it's not what I imagined it would be. I have memory loss. I have a traumatic brain injury. I hate that I'm going to have to live with this for the rest of my life.
The concept of a monster is something society often chooses to mythologize, casting true evil as something otherworldly, something that operates exclusively in the darkest corners of the night, far removed from the mundane reality of everyday life. We condition ourselves to believe that danger is visible, that it comes with a warning, and that the predators who walk among us will somehow reveal their true nature through a sinister demeanor or a terrifying presence. But the most profound tragedies in human history routinely prove this comfort to be a devastating illusion. In the sprawling, sun-baked neighborhoods of Houston, Texas, during the early years of the 1970s, a monster did not hide in the shadows. He did not skulk in the peripheral vision of the community. Instead, He operated in the bright, unforgiving light of the Texas sun, wearing the disarming smile of a friendly neighbor. He was a man who traded in sweetness, a man who built an empire of unspeakable horror behind the most innocent of facades. This is the story of the Houston mass murders, a chilling sequence of events that unfolded between 1970 and 1973, forever altering the landscape of American criminal justice and leaving an indelible, agonizing scar on the collective psyche of the nation. It is a story not just of unimaginable brutality, but of a catastrophic systemic failure, a community blinded by trust, and the tragic loss of youth. To understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, one must first look at the environment in which it was allowed to fester. The Heights area of Houston in the early 1970s was a place where working-class families built their lives, a neighborhood characterized by a sense of quiet familiarity. It was an era before the instant communication of the modern age, a time when children and teenagers roamed the streets with a degree of freedom that is difficult to fathom today. Boys rode their bicycles until the streetlights flickered on, seeking refuge from the sweltering Texas heat in local parks, convenience stores, and the homes of neighbors they believed they knew. In this trusting environment lived Dean Corll. Born in 1939, Corll was a man who seemed to embody the very essence of harmless, neighborly goodwill. His family owned and operated a local candy factory, a business that inherently carries connotations of joy, innocence, and childhood delight. Corll utilized this family enterprise to craft a public persona that was entirely unimpeachable. He became universally known throughout the neighborhood as the friendly man who was always ready with a smile and a handful of free sweets. To the children of the Heights, he was the Candy Man, a benevolent figure who offered a stark contrast to the strict rules of their parents or the disciplinary structures of their schools. But the candy was only the initial lure, the outermost layer of a meticulously constructed web design to capture a very specific demographic. Corll did not merely want the passing affection of neighborhood children. He possessed a dark, insatiable hunger for control, domination, and violence. His targets were male adolescents and young men, specifically those falling within the vulnerable age range of 13 to 20 years old. This is a critical period in human development, a transitional phase marked by a fierce desire for independence, a natural rebellion against authority, and an inherent longing for spaces where they could feel like adults. Corll understood adolescent psychology with the chilling precision of an apex predator. He recognized that to successfully trap these young men, he needed to offer them more than just candy. He needed to offer them sanctuary. He transformed his residence into a haven for the youth of the Heights, a place devoid of parental supervision and societal judgment. He invited them in to play video games, to listen to music, and most crucially, to drink beer. By providing alcohol and a space to socialize freely, Corll positioned himself not as a threatening adult, but as an understanding confidant, a cool, older friend who respected their emerging autonomy. However, Corll knew that his age and status as an adult could eventually arouse suspicion or create a barrier of intimidation. To bridge this gap, to ensure a steady and unsuspecting stream of victims walking willingly into his domain, he committed one of the most insidious acts of psychological manipulation in the annals of true crime. He weaponized the community's youth against itself. Corll recruited 2 local teenagers to serve as his accomplices, his procurers, and ultimately, his partners in an unfathomable enterprise of death. These were not hardened criminals from outside the community. They were boys from the very same neighborhood, faces that the victims recognized, trusted, and considered peers. Elmer Wayne Henley was a mere 16 years old, and David Brooks was 18. By enlisting Henley and Brooks, Corll effectively dismantled the natural defense mechanisms of his victims. A young boy might hesitate to follow a grown man into his home, but he would not think twice about accepting an invitation to a party from a schoolmate or a neighborhood acquaintance. The complicity of Henley and Brooks introduces a deeply disturbing layer to this tragedy, highlighting a terrifying commodification of human life. Corll did not simply ask for their help. He incentivized their betrayal with financial rewards. The lives of the young men in the Heights were assigned a monetary value, treated as mere transactions in a grotesque economy of violence. For every victim that Henley and Brooks successfully lured back to Coral's residence, they were paid sums ranging from $200 to $2,000. It is a chilling realization that the bonds of youth, the unwritten codes of neighborhood loyalty, and the fundamental empathy expected of human beings were entirely overridden by the promise of cash. These teenage accomplices would casually approach boys they knew, boys they may have grown up alongside, and invite them over for drinks or to use drugs, fully aware of the nightmarish fate that awaited them behind Coral's closed doors. Once the victims were intoxicated, disoriented by the alcohol or drugs they had willingly consumed in the company of supposed friends, the trap would spring shut. The illusion of the safe haven would instantly shatter, replaced by the grim reality of physical restraints, ropes, and chains, leading to days of unspeakable suffering. As the months passed between 1970 and 1973, a suffocating silence began to descend upon the Houston Heights. Boys were vanishing. They were leaving their homes for a quick ride to the store, stepping out to meet a friend, or heading to a local hangout, and they were simply never returning. The sudden absence of a child leaves a profound, echoing void in a family. Bedrooms sat empty, dinner plates remained unused, and parents were plunged into an agonizing purgatory of unanswered questions. The community was slowly bleeding its youth, losing its sons, brothers, and friends to an invisible force that seemed to leave no trace. But the true horror of the Houston mass murders is not confined solely to the actions of Dean Coral and his teenage accomplices. It is inextricably linked to the devastating negligence of the institutions sworn to protect the public. When the desperate, terrified parents of these missing boys approached the Houston Police Department to report their children vanished, they were met not with the urgent mobilization of law enforcement, but with bureaucratic apathy and a rigid, fatal assumption. Despite the alarming frequency of the disappearances, despite the specific demographic cluster of boys aged 13 to 20 vanishing from the exact same geographic area, the authorities uniformly dismissed the cases. The police categorized these missing children under a single, dismissive label: runaways. This label was not merely inaccurate. It was an active participant in the tragedy, a shield behind which Dean Coral was allowed to continue his slaughter unimpeded. The logic applied by the authorities was deeply flawed and rooted in a lack of empathy for the working-class families of the Heights. They operated on the assumption that teenage boys are naturally prone to rebellion, that they frequently abandon their homes to seek adventure or escape familial discord. When parents pleaded with officers, insisting that their sons had left their wallets behind, that they had close ties to their families, that they would never simply abandon their lives without a word, their cries fell on deaf ears. This systemic failure compounded the trauma of the victims' families in unimaginable ways. Not only were they forced to endure the agonizing disappearance of their children, but they were also actively gaslit by the very authorities they relied upon for help. They were told that their sons had chosen to leave, implying a failure of parenting or a fundamental flaw within the family structure. The parents were left completely isolated in their grief, forced to staple homemade missing posters to utility poles, to conduct their own frantic searches through the neighborhood streets, all while the police department remained deliberately blind to the serial predator operating right in their midst. Dozens of missing person reports were filed, and dozens were subsequently ignored, filed away in cabinets, while the victims suffered unimaginable horrors just a few streets over. The label of runaway effectively stripped the victims of their right to be searched for, treating them as delinquents rather than the vulnerable prey of a sadistic killer. The tragedy of the Houston mass murders is amplified by this agonizing irony. The answers the parents so desperately sought were not miles away, not in another state where a runaway might have hitchhiked, but right there in their own community. The perpetrator was the man who waved to them from his porch, the man who handed out candy, the man whose home was considered a safe spot by the very teenagers who were vanishing. For 3 long years, the Houston Heights was a hunting ground masked as a quiet suburb. The police looked away, the community trusted the untrustworthy, and young boys paid the ultimate price. By the time the illusion finally shattered in the sweltering August heat of 1973, the true scale of the devastation would prove so immense that it would permanently rewrite the history of American crime, revealing a death toll of at least 28 young men, a sprawling graveyard hidden beneath the coastal sands and boat sheds of Texas, and a grim legacy of institutional failure that would haunt the city of Houston for generations to come. This is the dark genesis of the Candyman's reign, a chilling testament to how easily evil can thrive when it is wrapped in the mundane, and when those tasked with seeing the truth simply refuse to open their eyes. To truly grasp the magnitude of the loss inflicted upon the city of Houston, one must first understand the specific fabric of the community that was targeted. The Houston Heights in the early 1970s was a distinct enclave, a working-class neighborhood characterized by modest homes, hard-working parents, and a tight-knit sense of local identity. It was a place where generations of families had laid down roots, where the rhythms of daily life were predictable and deeply intertwined. In this era, the concept of a neighborhood was a tangible, living thing. People knew the names of the shopkeepers, they recognized the cars parked on their streets, and, most importantly, they recognized the children who played on the sidewalks. The Heights was a community built on a foundation of implicit trust, a shared understanding that neighbors looked out for one another. This was the era before the constant surveillance of digital technology, a time when a child's independence was not heavily restricted by the hypervigilance that characterizes modern parenting. Teenagers in the Heights experienced a remarkable degree of autonomy. After school and during the long, suffocating heat of the Texas summers, these boys were expected to entertain themselves. They rode bicycles in packs, exploring the expansive concrete landscapes, finding refuge in local parks, bowling alleys, and corner stores. This freedom was a rite of passage, a crucial element of their development as they navigated the awkward, liminal space between childhood and adulthood. However, this very freedom, this beautiful, unstructured autonomy, created a profound vulnerability. The streets that were supposed to be their playground became a hunting ground, precisely because the community could not conceive of a predator existing within its own borders. The working-class nature of the neighborhood meant that many households were dual income, with parents working long, exhausting shifts to provide for their families. Consequently, many of these teenagers were latchkey kids, returning to empty houses in the afternoon, seeking out the company of peers to fill the hours before their parents returned. This dynamic created a vacuum of supervision, a perfectly calibrated environment for a predator to exploit. The victims of Dean Corll were not anonymous figures devoid of history or connection. They were the very lifeblood of the Heights community. They were boys ranging from the fragile age of 13 to young men of 20, a demographic standing precisely on the threshold of their futures. These were not outcasts or drifters. They were deeply embedded in the social fabric of their neighborhoods. They were sons who mowed the lawn on Saturday mornings, brothers who teased their younger siblings, athletes who played baseball on dusty local diamonds, and high school students trying to figure out their place in the world. They were boys with hobbies, with aspirations, with favorite bands, and with families who loved them fiercely. When we speak of 28 victims, the sheer volume of the number can sometimes obscure the individual humanity of each lost life. But it is vital to remember that each number represents an empty chair at a dinner table, a bedroom preserved as a tragic shrine, and a family forever shattered by an agonizing lack of closure. The specific targeting of this age group by the perpetrator was not accidental. It was a calculated exploitation of adolescent psychology. At 13, 14, and 15 years old, a boy is desperately seeking validation, independence, and a sense of belonging outside the family unit. They are naturally drawn to older figures who offer a glimpse into the adult world without the suffocating restrictions of parental authority. Dean Corll, with his candy factory background and his seemingly endless supply of resources, presented an irresistible facade. He was the affluent older neighbor who never judged, who never imposed curfews, and who provided the ultimate teenage sanctuary. To these boys, an invitation to his home felt like a privilege, a validation of their maturity. They were too young to recognize the inherent danger in an adult man who sought out the exclusive company of teenage boys, and their inherent innocence blinded them to the possibility of malevolence. They walked through his front door not with trepidation, but with a sense of excitement and camaraderie, completely unaware that they were stepping into an abyss from which they would never return. The architecture of this tragedy is inextricably linked to the method of capture, a method that relied entirely on the ultimate betrayal of trust. The presence of Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks transformed a sinister threat into an invisible, ubiquitous trap. The victims were not kidnapped from dark alleys by a stranger in a passing car. They were not violently snatched from the streets in broad daylight. Instead, they were gently guided to their doom by familiar faces. Henley and Brooks were woven into the very tapestry of the Heights youth culture. They attended the same schools, they frequented the same local hangouts, and they understood the social currency of the neighborhood. When a teenage boy was approached by Henley or Brooks, there was no biological alarm bell that rang in his head. There was no surge of adrenaline, no instinct to flee. The request was always casual, perfectly mimicking the normal social interactions of adolescence. It was an offer to skip school and hang out, a promise of free beer, or a suggestion to go smoke marijuana at a house where there were no parents to intervene. To a young boy eager to fit in, eager to experience the rebellion of youth, this was an invitation that was almost impossible to refuse. The insidiousness of this approach cannot be overstated. The victims willingly surrendered their autonomy, placing their physical safety entirely in the hands of boys they considered peers, or, at the very least, harmless acquaintances. The journey from the familiar streets of their neighborhood to the suffocating horror of the Coral residence was paved with casual conversation, shared laughter, and a profound, misplaced trust. When they arrived, the atmosphere was carefully designed to maintain the illusion of a party. The music played, the drinks were poured, and the victims relaxed, lowering whatever natural defenses they might have possessed. They ingested the alcohol or the drugs provided to them, unaware that they were chemically participating in their own subjugation. The transition from a relaxed social gathering to a nightmare of captivity happened in an instant. The moment the victims became physically incapacitated or sufficiently distracted, the friendly facade was violently discarded. The boys who had guided them there, the neighbors they thought they knew, actively participated in their physical restraint, sealing their fate for a mere handful of dollars. This level of deception represents a profound violation of the human social contract, weaponizing the inherent trust of youth to feed a monster. As the boys vanished one by one, a thick, suffocating blanket of grief and confusion settled over the Heights. The disappearances were abrupt, inexplicable, and left behind a chaotic void. A boy would leave his home to walk to a friend's house a few blocks away and simply evaporate. Bicycles were found abandoned on street corners, half-eaten meals were left on kitchen counters, and the normal, mundane routines of life were abruptly frozen in time. The parents, driven mad by anxiety and fear, naturally turned to the one institution they believed would protect them, the Houston Police Department. However, their desperate pleas for help collided with a bureaucratic wall of apathy and a deeply entrenched cultural prejudice. The early 1970s in America was a period of immense social upheaval. The generation gap was widening, fueled by the counterculture movement, the ongoing conflict overseas, and a general atmosphere of youth rebellion. Thousands of teenagers across the country were leaving home, seeking alternative lifestyles, or escaping domestic friction. The Houston Police Department, looking at this national trend, applied a devastatingly broad and lazy brush to the missing boys of the Heights. Almost every single disappearance was immediately categorized as a runaway case. When a frantic mother reported that her son had vanished, she was routinely met with patronizing dismissals. The police argued that boys of that age naturally rebelled, that they had simply packed a bag and headed for the coast or joined a commune somewhere far away. This assumption was fiercely contested by the families. These parents knew their children. They knew that their boys had strong ties to the neighborhood, that they lacked the resources to travel across the state, and that they had left behind cherished possessions, summer jobs, and beloved pets. They knew, with the primal certainty of a parent, that their children had not left voluntarily. Yet, the authorities remained stubbornly entrenched in their assumption, refusing to see the terrifying pattern that was emerging right in front of them. The sheer concentration of missing teenage boys from a specific, localized geographic area over a 3-year period should have triggered massive alarms within the homicide division. But because the runaway narrative provided a convenient excuse to avoid opening complex investigations, the police actively chose to look away. This institutional blindness provided the perpetrators with the most valuable asset a serial predator can possess: time and complete impunity. The families were left to conduct their own agonizing, fruitless searches, wandering the streets, handing out flyers, and staring out of windows, while the architect of their misery continued his quiet, methodical slaughter just a few miles away, shielded by a badge of systemic indifference. The threshold of Dean Corll's residence represented a terrifying boundary between the mundane reality of the Houston Heights and a meticulously engineered realm of absolute nightmare. When a teenage boy stepped through that front door, accompanied by Elmer Wayne Henley or David Brooks, they believed they were entering a sanctuary of adolescent freedom. The environment was carefully curated to disarm them completely. The air was heavy with the sounds of contemporary music, the clinking of beer bottles, and the casual, boisterous laughter of youth. To a boy seeking refuge from the sweltering Texas heat or the watchful eyes of his parents, this setting felt like a remarkable stroke of luck. It was a space where the rules of the outside world were temporarily suspended, where they could indulge in the forbidden thrill of alcohol and drugs without consequence. Corll, the supposed benevolent host, remained in the background, a seemingly passive benefactor providing the means for their entertainment. The victims were encouraged to relax, to consume the provided intoxicants freely, and to let down every conceivable guard. This initial phase of the encounter was utterly devoid of malice, a calculated performance designed to chemically and psychologically incapacitate the prey. The alcohol and narcotics flowing through their systems slowed their reflexes, clouded their judgment, and fostered an artificial sense of camaraderie. They were lulled into a deep, false security, utterly blind to the invisible net that had already been cast over them. The presence of their peers, the boys who had invited them, acted as an anchor of trust. Why would they fear an environment endorsed by the very people they went to school with, the boys they played sports alongside, the familiar faces of their own neighborhood? This profound manipulation of trust was the cornerstone of the operation, ensuring that the victims entered the trap not only willingly, but with a sense of gratitude towards their captors. The transition from this manufactured sanctuary to a landscape of sheer terror did not happen gradually. It was a sudden, violent rupture of reality. The precise moment the trap was sprung was dictated by the victim's level of intoxication. Once the alcohol and drugs had sufficiently dulled their senses and motor skills, the atmosphere in the house shifted with whiplash-inducing speed. The casual demeanor of Henley and Brooks would instantly evaporate, replaced by a cold, transactional efficiency. Before the victim could even process the sudden change in dynamics, physical restraints were violently applied. The clinking of beer bottles was replaced by the terrifying, metallic sound of handcuffs and shackles snapping shut. The sudden immobilization was designed to induce immediate, paralyzing panic. The victims, mere moments ago enjoying a carefree gathering, suddenly found their arms and legs forcibly pinned. The psychological shock of this moment was arguably as devastating as the physical restraint. In the span of a heartbeat, the fundamental laws of their universe were overturned. The older neighbor they thought was a friend transformed into a monstrous captor, and the peers they trusted revealed themselves to be active, willing accomplices in their subjugation. The realization that they had been sold, that their lives had been traded for a handful of dollars by boys they knew, must have inflicted a psychological wound so deep it defies comprehension. They were not merely victims of a stranger's random violence. They were the casualties of an intimate, unfathomable betrayal. Stripped of their mobility and their freedom, they were forcibly dragged into the darkest heart of the operation, Dean Corll's bedroom, a space custom-built for prolonged human suffering. Within the confines of that bedroom, the true, unspeakable horror of the enterprise was finally unveiled. Corll had not merely improvised a space for captivity, he had engineered a theater of cruelty with terrifying precision. The focal point of this room was a specially designed wooden structure, a grotesque frame meticulously constructed for the sole purpose of total immobilization and prolonged torture. The victims were hoisted onto this board, their wrists and ankles bound tightly to its corners. This posture of absolute vulnerability was the foundation upon which Coral enacted his sadistic desires. For the captive teenagers, time lost all meaning. They were plunged into a terrifying abyss of pain and degradation that stretched on for days. The torture was not a frantic, disorganized act of violence, but a methodical, sustained campaign of physical and sexual abuse. Coral utilized a horrifying array of implements to inflict agony, incorporating the application of electrical currents to shock his victims, alongside brutal, sustained beatings. The flesh of these young men was subjected to systematic cutting, a slow, agonizing desecration of their bodies while they remained entirely helpless, unable to fight back, unable to flee, and completely isolated from the outside world they had known just hours prior. The acoustic insulation of the house, combined with the sheer audacity of operating in a bustling suburban neighborhood, ensured that their screams went entirely unheard or unnoticed by the world outside. The agonizing duration of their captivity meant that the victims were forced to endure not only the acute pain of the physical assaults, but the creeping, psychological devastation of knowing that survival was impossible. They were trapped in a state of continuous terror, their young minds forced to grapple with the absolute certainty of their impending death at the hands of a man who derived immense pleasure from their suffering. This prolonged period of agony underscores the sheer depravity of the crimes, revealing a perpetrator who did not merely seek to kill, but who hungered for the absolute destruction of a human being's spirit before extinguishing their life. When Coral had finally exhausted his sadistic impulses, when the days of unimaginable torture reached their inevitable, grim conclusion, the manner of execution was carried out with chilling, clinical efficiency. The chaotic violence of the preceding days abruptly gave way to a stark, mechanical finality. The victims, already broken physically and mentally, were murdered using one of two primary methods. Some were ruthlessly strangled, the life squeezed from them with a rope in a final act of intimate, silent violence. Others were executed with a firearm, a gunshot delivered directly to the head, ending their suffering with a sudden, deafening finality. The cessation of life, however, was only the beginning of a highly organized, systematic process of concealment. The transition from active torture chamber to post-mortem disposal operation was handled with the practiced routine of a grim assembly line. Coral, aided by his accomplices, treated the bodies of these young men not as human remains, but as hazardous waste that needed to be neutralized and hidden. To prevent the detection of decomposition, the corpses were tightly bound and wrapped in multiple, heavy layers of industrial plastic sheeting. This was not a hurried attempt to hide a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated procedure designed to seal the victims away from the world permanently. To further mask the inevitable odors of decay, the plastic-wrapped remains were heavily coated in quicklime, a chemical agent intended to accelerate decomposition and neutralize the scent of death. This meticulous preparation highlights the cold, calculated nature of the entire enterprise, proving that Coral was acutely aware of the logistical challenges of mass murder and had developed a sophisticated methodology to ensure his ongoing impunity. The final phase of this macabre operation involved the transportation and interment of the victims in 3 carefully selected geographical locations, each chosen for its isolation and its ability to swallow the evidence of Coral's atrocities. The primary burial site was a rented boat shed located squarely within the Houston Heights neighborhood, a chilling proximity to the very streets where the boys had been abducted. Beneath the dirt floor of this unassuming structure, hidden away amidst the mundane clutter of suburban storage, Coral created a sprawling, subterranean graveyard. It is a deeply unsettling reality that the residents of the Heights walked past this shed, drove by it daily, completely unaware that the missing children they were frantically searching for were buried just feet beneath the soil in their own neighborhood. When the capacity of the boat shed was threatened, or perhaps to diversify the risk of discovery, Coral expanded his disposal network to more remote locations. He transported the plastic-wrapped, lime-covered bodies across the Texas landscape, burying them in the shifting sands of the High Island Beach along the Gulf Coast. The vast, desolate stretches of the shoreline provided a perfect, featureless expanse to hide his crimes, the rhythmic crashing of the waves serving as a silent sentinel over the shallow graves. Other victims were transported deep into the dense, rural areas surrounding Lake Sam Rayburn in East Texas, their remains interred in the quiet, undisturbed earth of the wilderness. By distributing the bodies across these three distinct locations, Coral constructed a sprawling, hidden empire of death, a network of graves that perfectly insulated him from discovery. The boys who had vanished from the sunlit streets of Houston were thus permanently erased, swallowed by the earthen sheds, on beaches and in forests, their agonizing final days, known only to the monsters who put them there. The chilling efficiency of this entire process highlights a level of predatory sophistication that remains unparalleled, solidifying this period as one of the darkest and most profoundly disturbing chapters in the annals of criminal history. The catastrophic unraveling of the Houston Candyman's reign did not begin with a breakthrough in forensic science or a meticulously planned police raid, but rather through a sudden, chaotic eruption of violence inside the very house of horrors that had claimed so many young lives. The night of August 7, 1973, served as the beginning of the end, triggered by a reckless decision made by Elmer Wayne Henley. Seeking to satisfy his own volatile impulses, Henley had gone out and picked up a teenage boy named Timothy Curley, along with a young woman named Rhonda Williams, under the usual guise of friendship and shared intoxicants. He brought them back to the house on West 17th Street, failing to realize that he had crossed a critical boundary in the twisted logic of Dean Coral. Coral, whose obsession was strictly focused on the domination and destruction of young men, was immediately incensed by the presence of the young woman. The air in the house turned brittle with tension as Coral's frustration mounted, his usual calm, disarming persona shattered by the intrusion of an element he deemed unacceptable. When the group finally succumbed to the effects of the substances they had consumed and drifted into a heavy, drug-induced slumber, Coral took control. He acted with a cold, terrifying efficiency, binding Curley, Williams, and even his longtime accomplice, Henley, tightly to the furniture. The dynamic of the house had shifted instantly from a social gathering to a prison, and for the first time, Henley found himself not as the perpetrator, but as the potential prey. Coral, hovering over them with a dark, predatory intensity, made his intentions abundantly clear. He intended to torture and murder all three of them. The sheer, naked terror of that moment, staring up at the man he had served for years as he prepared to visit upon him the same unspeakable fate they had inflicted on others, likely triggered a primal survival instinct in Henley that overrode his indoctrination. As the sun began to rise on the morning of August 8, 1973, the atmosphere in the house was thick with a suffocating anticipation of death. Henley, awake and tethered in his bondage, realized that his only path to survival lay in manipulating the man who held them captive. He began to plead with Coral, employing every ounce of his cunning to convince his master that he could still be useful. He argued that if Coral would only release him from his restraints, he could help handle the disposal of the other two victims, effectively offering to trade their lives for his own freedom. It was a desperate, groveling negotiation, a final test of whether Coral's sadistic control over his accomplice was absolute. Whether due to a lapse in judgment, an arrogant sense of total dominance, or perhaps a flicker of the old, twisted camaraderie, Coral finally agreed to the bargain. He moved toward Henley, the heavy shackles biting into the boy's skin, and began the process of loosening the bonds. In that split second, as the tension of the restraint slackened, the fragile power dynamic of the room snapped. Henley did not hesitate. He lunged for the opportunity he had manufactured with his lies. He scrambled toward a small .22 caliber pistol that Coral had left within reach, his movements fueled by the absolute, desperate adrenaline of a man facing his own demise. He grabbed the weapon and, without a moment of hesitation or remorse, fired at Coral. 6 bullets shattered the morning stillness of the heights, tearing into the man who had been the architect of such unimaginable cruelty. Coral collapsed, his life ending in the same room where so many others had been extinguished under his sadistic hand. The monster who had believed himself untouchable, who had operated with the impunity of a neighborhood fixture, lay dead on the floor of his own torture chamber, brought down by the very accomplice he had corrupted. The immediate aftermath of the shooting was a frantic, terrifying scramble as the gravity of the situation began to settle upon Henley. He had just killed the man he feared most, but in doing so, he had stepped into the blinding light of a truth he could no longer hide. He realized that the authorities, regardless of their past negligence, would have to be confronted with the reality of what lay inside that house. In a state of profound shock and perhaps a lingering, fearful recognition of his own culpability, Henley finally reached for the telephone. He dialed the police, his voice trembling as he reported the shooting and admitted his involvement in the death of Dean Coral. When the Houston officers arrived at the scene, they were prepared to investigate a simple shooting, perhaps a drug-fueled domestic dispute between criminals. They could not have possibly been prepared for the nightmare that awaited them. As they entered the house, the sterile, industrial smell of quicklime and the metallic tang of dried blood hung heavy in the air. The discovery of the first bodies was like unearthing a grave that had been buried in the heart of suburbia. The officers, hardened by years of patrolling the streets of Houston, found themselves reeling in the face of what they were uncovering. They found the chains, the heavy-duty restraints, and the grotesque, custom-built board that Coral had used to torment his victims. The realization dawned on them slowly, a cold, creeping horror. This was not a single murder, but the center of a mass grave. The process of discovery became a grueling, haunting excavation of the neighborhood's lost children. Henley, now fully cooperating under the weight of his own capture, led the investigators to the locations he had helped mark with death. The boat shed in the Heights, the very structure that had stood unnoticed by hundreds of neighbors, became the focal point of the investigation. As the investigators began to dig into the floorboards, they were met with the horrific, tangible evidence of the last 3 years. One by one, the remains were retrieved from their plastic-wrapped, lime-covered interment, a process that felt like a slow, deliberate unveiling of a secret that should have been discovered years before. The magnitude of the crime began to dwarf every other case in the department's history. Every day, the news crews gathered, and the parents of the missing boys waited, oscillating between the desperate hope that their son might have run away and the sickening, mounting evidence that he had been a victim of the Candy Man. The discovery of the bodies was a relentless, soul-crushing progression. 28 victims were eventually pulled from the earth, their remains telling the stories of lives cut tragically short. The investigators were forced to document every agonizing detail, from the position of the bodies to the types of bindings used, creating a forensic roadmap of the atrocities that had occurred. As the scope of the case expanded, the search for victims extended beyond the shed and out into the desolate fringes of the Texas landscape. The team moved their focus to the dunes of High Island, where the sand had been disturbed just enough to hide the remnants of Coral's cruelty. The landscape, once seen as a site of recreation and escape, was now permanently stained by the presence of the shallow graves. The humidity of the coast and the relentless nature of the terrain made the recovery process particularly arduous, yet the investigators persisted, driven by the grim mandate to bring every boy home to his family. The final search locations near Lake Sam Rayburn proved just as difficult, the deep, overgrown forests concealing the remains in a way that defied easy detection. The entire investigation was a testament to the sheer scale of the deception. The police, who had spent 3 years systematically ignoring the cries of parents, were now forced to confront the direct, undeniable consequences of their own inaction. The press began to scrutinize every aspect of how these boys had been allowed to disappear, how the runaway narrative had been used to cloak a monster, and how the community had failed its most vulnerable members. The documentation of the crime scene, the cataloging of the evidence, and the testimony provided by Henley all pointed to a level of organization and sadism that the public could hardly comprehend. As the weeks dragged on and the numbers of confirmed victims climbed, the Houston Candyman investigation solidified its place as one of the most significant and distressing milestones in the history of American serial murder. The tragedy was not just in the deaths. but in the glaring, systemic failures that had allowed the slaughter to continue for so long, a realization that would fuel a national outcry for accountability and reform in the way law enforcement handled missing persons cases. The case of Dean Corll and his accomplices fundamentally altered the relationship between the public and the police, serving as a permanent warning about the dangers of institutional apathy and the vital importance of listening to the voices of those who are desperately searching for their loved ones. The legal aftermath of the Houston mass murders was a clinical, agonizing process that sought to impose order on a narrative of absolute chaos and depravity. Once the full, horrifying scope of the crimes was revealed, the judicial system faced the monumental challenge of prosecuting Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks for their roles in the deaths of at least 28 young men. The trials of these two young men were not merely proceedings to determine guilt. They were a public reckoning with the systemic failures that had allowed Dean Corll to operate with impunity for 3 years. The courtroom became a theater of profound grief and chilling testimony, as the families of the victims were forced to confront the individuals who had lured their children into the very maw of the beast. Throughout the proceedings, the defense strategies employed by Henley and Brooks were met with intense scrutiny, as the gravity of their participation could not be obscured by their youth or the dominant influence of Corll. The prosecution built a case centered on the systematic nature of the recruitment and the cold, transactional logic of the remuneration, effectively painting a picture of two accomplices who were fully aware of the lethal consequences of their actions. Elmer Wayne Henley's legal journey was perhaps the most complex, as he occupied the dual role of the primary accomplice and the individual who ultimately ended Corll's life. His testimony provided the prosecution with the chilling internal perspective of the torture chamber, detailing the methodology of the abduction, the psychological conditioning of the victims, and the procedural efficiency of the disposal. In the courtroom, Henley was not a penitent figure seeking absolution, but a young man whose testimony laid bare the gruesome reality of his cooperation. The jury, tasked with weighing the influence of the manipulative Corll against the voluntary participation of Henley, ultimately rejected any narrative that cast him as a mere bystander or a coerced victim of circumstances. The evidence demonstrated that Henley had been a consistent, active participant in the procurement and concealment of victims, repeatedly choosing financial gain over the sanctity of human life. The legal outcome for Henley was a series of 6 life sentences, a cumulative punishment that reflected the sheer scale of the crimes he had enabled and participated in. The sentence was a heavy, definitive judgment that ensured he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars, a necessary measure of justice for the families whose lives had been irrevocably shattered. David Brooks, similarly, faced a trial that stripped away the veneer of passivity, revealing his active engagement in the recruitment and restraint of the young men. Throughout his judicial proceedings, the prosecution emphasized the longevity and consistency of his involvement, proving that his actions were not isolated incidents, but part of an ongoing, calculated enterprise. Brooks, much like Henley, occupied a role that was essential to Corll's ability to maintain his facade of normalcy. Without the complicity of these two teenagers, the supply chain of victims would have been severed long before the death toll reached its staggering final count. The legal system, in passing a sentence of life imprisonment, acknowledged that Brooks bore equal responsibility for the systemic erasure of the young men from the Houston Heights. For the families, the conviction of Brooks provided a grim, necessary closure, affirming that the individuals who had preyed upon their sons would never again be free to walk the streets they had once hunted. Brooks remained incarcerated until his death in 2020, his long years in the prison system serving as a permanent, quiet testament to the gravity of his crimes and the finality of the justice meted out in the wake of the horror. The courtroom environment during these trials was characterized by an overwhelming, palpable sense of mourning that transcended the technicalities of the law. Families sat in rigid rows, listening to the sterile descriptions of their children's final moments, their grief compounded by the realization that their sons had been viewed as mere commodities by the people they trusted. The attorneys, the judges, and the jurors were tasked with the impossible duty of translating such profound, inhuman suffering into a language of legal culpability. Every detail provided, the location of a shallow grave, the specific instruments of torture, the amount of money paid for a life, was a fresh, lacerating wound. The trials also became a platform for the defense to explore the influence of Coral's psychological dominance, yet this line of argument largely failed to resonate with the public and a judicial system that saw the choices made by Henley and Brooks as deliberate, immoral acts. The legal process did not just seek to punish the perpetrators, it sought to establish an official, irrevocable record of the truth, stripping away the lies and the mystery that had surrounded the victims' disappearances for so long. The resolution of the trials marked the conclusion of the immediate, procedural response to the massacre, yet the emotional resonance of the courtroom verdicts continued to echo throughout Houston for decades. The sentencing did not bring back the 28 young men, nor did it alleviate the agonizing, lifelong trauma suffered by their surviving families. The legal outcomes were, however, a critical component of the community's attempt to reconcile with its own failure. The judicial process served to validate the parents' initial, dismissed concerns, effectively reversing the runaway narrative that the police had so stubbornly clung to. By securing the convictions, the court provided a clear, undeniable refutation of the institutional negligence that had plagued the investigation, cementing in the public record that these were not lost children who had run away, but victims of a meticulously organized mass murder. The focus of the trial on the mechanics of the crime also served as a dark, cautionary lesson on the necessity of vigilance, the danger of unchecked predation, and the absolute requirement for law enforcement to treat every missing person report with the gravity it demands. As the years progressed, the legal legacy of the Houston Candyman trials became intertwined with broader reforms in the American justice system. The case highlighted the urgent need for better coordination between law enforcement agencies and more rigorous protocols for identifying serial offenders whose activities span long periods of time and multiple locations. The trials served as a catalyst for a more compassionate, victim-centered approach to missing persons cases, encouraging the system to listen to the families who knew their loved ones better than any static, bureaucratic file ever could. The courtroom, initially a place of cold, clinical procedure, became a sacred space where the lives of the victims were formally acknowledged and their deaths accounted for. The judicial system, through the conviction of Henley and Brooks, fulfilled its duty to the extent that it could, ensuring that the individuals responsible for the systematic destruction of human life were held accountable. The finality of the sentences offered a degree of societal closure, yet the memories of the victims and the gravity of the systemic betrayal remained, a permanent part of the community's history. The trials were the end of the legal process, but for the city of Houston, they were the beginning of a long, difficult process of remembering, grieving, and finally, acknowledging the immense, irreparable cost of the Candyman's reign. The justice served was not a remedy for the loss, but a vital declaration that the lives of these young men, however briefly they were held, were considered precious by the law, and that their absence would not be forgotten by the world that had failed them so catastrophically. The final chapter of the Houston mass murders is not found in the court transcripts or the forensic reports, but in the enduring, mournful silence that haunts the city of Houston and the collective memory of a nation. The discovery of the 28 victims did not simply end a criminal investigation. It triggered a profound, irreversible shift in the American consciousness, exposing a gaping, necrotic wound in the societal fabric that had allowed such unparalleled evil to flourish in plain sight. The legacy of Dean Corll and his accomplices is a dark, sprawling monument to the fragility of trust, the lethality of institutional apathy, and the catastrophic consequences of ignoring the vulnerable. For the city of Houston, the aftermath was characterized by an immediate and crushing loss of innocence. A neighborhood that had prided itself on its quiet, working-class stability was revealed to be a place where teenagers could be hunted and slaughtered with the ease of a casual transaction. The Candyman moniker, once a symbol of childhood treats and neighborhood benevolence, was forever repurposed into a synonym for the absolute betrayal of parental trust, serving as a chilling reminder that the greatest threats often were the most inviting faces. The systemic failure that defined this era remains the most enduring and agonizing aspect of the case. The repeated, dismissive classification of missing teenagers as runaways by the Houston Police Department constitutes a historic indictment of law enforcement's dereliction of duty. It is a failure that transcends mere error. It represents a fundamental abandonment of the community's protective mandate. The parents who knocked on doors, who filed reports, and who begged for assistance were not merely ignored. They were effectively silenced by a bureaucracy that prioritized convenience and prejudice over the preservation of human life. This institutional blindness enabled a serial predator to operate for 3 full years, during which time each new disappearance was treated as a singular, isolated event rather than part of a discernible, escalating pattern. The tragedy serves as a perennial, cautionary case study in criminal justice, illustrating the lethal necessity for law enforcement to embrace victim-centered investigations that prioritize the lived experience of the families over the detached, often flawed, assumptions of the authorities. The failure was a mirror held up to the city, forcing it to confront the reality that its institutions had not only failed to prevent the slaughter but had, through their inaction, actively facilitated the predator's survival. For the survivors and the families of the victims, the aftermath was a life sentence of a different, more personal kind. The pain of losing a child to a violent, systematic murder is an agony that does not dissipate with the passage of time or the finality of a courtroom verdict. It is a grief that reshapes the entire structure of a family, leaving behind a void that no amount of justice can fill. The realization that their sons were not merely victims of a stranger's malice, but were specifically targeted by acquaintances, peers, and neighbors, added a profound layer of trauma to their loss. The betrayal by those who lured the victims, the teenagers they knew and trusted, introduced a sense of profound, existential insecurity. It shattered the belief that danger was something that arrived from the outside, teaching the community that the most devastating threats could be woven into the very fabric of their daily existence. The families were left to navigate a world that had been forever darkened, forced to mourn their children in a society that had once refused to even acknowledge their disappearances. Their resilience in the face of such unimaginable horror is perhaps the only glimmer of light in this otherwise pitch-black narrative, as they fought to ensure that their sons were not reduced to mere statistics or footnotes in a criminal casebook, but were remembered as vibrant, young individuals with dreams that were cruelly extinguished. The national impact of the Houston mass murders rippled through the decades, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape of American true crime and social policy. The case became a defining reference point for serial violence, a benchmark of brutality against which future atrocities would be measured. It forced a national conversation about the rights of victims' families, the accountability of local law enforcement, and the importance of recognizing the patterns that serial predators rely upon for their protection. The subsequent reforms in how missing persons cases were processed, the increased skepticism toward the runaway narrative, and the development of specialized investigative units to handle serial offenders can all be traced, in part, to the systemic failures revealed in Houston. The case became a somber, essential component of a training and discourse that shaped modern criminal investigation, serving as a constant, sobering reminder of the consequences when empathy is lost and systemic apathy takes hold. It was a catalyst for a more proactive, diligent approach to public safety, one that demands that the needs of the community and the safety of its youth be placed above the convenience of bureaucratic ease. As time moves forward, the physical sites of the crimes, the boat shed in the Heights, the lonely stretches of High Island, and the forests near Lake Sam Rayburn, have largely returned to the obscurity from which they emerged, yet the dark history they bear remains a permanent fixture in the psyche of the region. The houses have been renovated, the streets have been renamed or repaved, and new generations have moved into the neighborhoods where the Candyman once walked, but the shadow of the massacre continues to linger. It is a cautionary tale that is passed down in the hushed tones of local history, a reminder of the fragility of the peace we enjoy and the vigilance we must maintain. The legacy of the Houston mass murders is not just the memory of the lives that were lost. It is the collective commitment to ensure that such institutional and societal failures are never permitted to occur again. It is a declaration that the voices of the vulnerable, the cries of the parents, and the memory of the dead demand a level of societal attention that can never be compromised. Ultimately, the tragedy of Dean Corll and his accomplices serves as a profound, agonizing lesson on the nature of evil and the responsibility of the community. It forces us to confront the unsettling possibility that the monsters we fear are not mythical creatures lurking in the dark, but people who live among us, who smile at us, and who exist within the structures of our daily lives. The Houston mass murders remind us that our safety is not guaranteed by the mere existence of institutions, but by the relentless, daily commitment to look out for one another, to listen when we are told that something is wrong, and to reject the comforting, fatal illusions of apathy. The 28 young men whose lives were stolen did not die in vain if their deaths continue to serve as a beacon of warning, illuminating the necessity of radical empathy and the unwavering vigilance required to protect the most vulnerable among us. Their memory is a sacred, heavy trust, a call to action that echoes through the years, reminding us that in the face of darkness, the only defense we have is the strength of our community and the unyielding determination to see the truth, no matter how terrifying it may be. The legacy of the Candy Man is not found in the deeds of the killer, but in the resolve of those who survived, who remembered, and who ultimately ensured that the story of the lost boys would be told, heard, and never, ever forgotten. As we reflect on this grim, transformative period in our history, we are reminded that our responsibility to one another is the most fundamental aspect of our existence, a burden we must carry with the utmost care, lest we allow the quiet, polite mask of the world to once again hide the reality of the darkness that can thrive within it. Through the lens of this tragedy, we see not only the worst of humanity, but the critical importance of the best in humanity, the courage to speak, the conviction to protect, and the perseverance to seek justice even when it seems impossible. The story remains a testament to the fact that while evil may be patient and methodical, the memory of those who are lost and the collective will of those who seek the truth is an enduring force that can, in time, pierce even the thickest veil of deception, ensuring that the light of justice, however belated, continues to burn as a beacon of remembrance for those who were taken from the sunlit streets of the Houston Heights. The conclusion of our narrative, while marking the end of the chronological investigation and the subsequent judicial process, leaves us in a reflective space concerning the profound and lasting cultural imprint of the Houston mass murders. As we look back upon the events that transpired between 1970 and 1973, we find that the legacy of Dean Corll, Elmer Wayne Henley, and David Brooks has transcended the typical boundaries of a crime story to become a seminal study in the architecture of urban dread and systemic negligence. The transformation of the Houston Heights from a place of domestic tranquility to a site of profound trauma is a narrative trajectory that has been analyzed by criminologists, sociologists, and historians for over half a century. It serves as a grim marker of a societal turning point, where the naive, mid-century expectation of community safety collided with the brutal realities of modern serial predation. This collision resulted in a permanent scarring of the American social consciousness, forever altering how local communities interact with their own sense of security and how they view the potential for malevolence in their immediate, mundane surroundings. The Candy Man is no longer merely a name for a specific murderer. He has become an archetype for the wolf in sheep's clothing, a terrifying manifestation of the realization that the most dangerous individuals are often those who appear the most integrated into the routines of our daily existence. This cultural shift is perhaps most evident in the way the Houston community, and indeed the entire nation, began to interrogate its relationship with the concept of the stranger and the neighbor. Prior to the exposure of the Candy Man's crimes, the social contract of the suburbs was predicated on an almost reflexive trust. The assumption that a known face, a familiar smile, or a helpful gesture were sufficient indicators of character provided a thin layer of comfort that was violently stripped away when the scope of Corll's operations was laid bare. We can trace a direct line from the psychological rupture caused by this case to the modern, often heightened, culture of vigilance and suspicion that characterizes our current age. The innocence that was lost in the Houston Heights in the summer of 1973 was not just the innocence of the 28 boys who perished, but the innocence of an entire generation of Americans who learned, through the most horrific medium imaginable, that the borders of their own homes were not impenetrable, and that their neighbors were capable of things that were previously considered unthinkable. This realization fostered a deep-seated, systemic skepticism that has since become a foundational element of the urban experience, fundamentally changing the way parents parent, the way neighbors interact, and the way the community defines its collective responsibility to its children. Furthermore, the academic and investigative legacy of this case cannot be overstated, as it became a cornerstone for the development of modern behavioral science as applied to law enforcement. The Houston mass murders provided a brutal, data-rich case study that helped shape the methodology of serial killer profiling and tactical response. For the investigators who came after, the errors made in Houston, the systemic blindness, the dismissal of reports, and the refusal to connect seemingly disparate disappearances became the essential what not to do manual. It necessitated a paradigm shift that moved away from reactive, localized policing toward a more proactive, interdepartmental, and evidence-based approach to serial crime. The case highlighted the critical importance of information sharing and the recognition of behavioral patterns over geographic boundaries, concepts that now form the bedrock of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and similar task forces worldwide. In this sense, the 28 victims became unintentional pioneers in a more sophisticated and capable criminal justice system, their deaths forcing the modernization of an investigative apparatus that had previously relied on archaic methods and flawed assumptions. While this evolution of methodology does nothing to mitigate the tragedy of their individual fates, it stands as a testament to the fact that the system was, at the very least, capable of learning from its most harrowing failures. The role of the media in the aftermath of the case also deserves reflection, as it marked an early, albeit primitive, instance of the true crime phenomenon that now dominates contemporary media consumption. The initial silence of the local authorities was eventually replaced by an overwhelming, global media onslaught that sought to satisfy the public's macabre fascination with the details of the torture, the identity of the perpetrators, and the location of the graves. This period of media saturation set the tone for how we engage with serial violence today, walking the precarious line between informing the public and exploiting the trauma of the victims' families for entertainment value. The Houston mass murders were a trial by fire for the media, presenting ethical challenges that are still debated in the industry. How does one cover such profound darkness without devaluing the lives that were lost? How does one report on the mechanics of torture without feeding the ego of the deceased predator? These are questions that, while perhaps not fully answered in 1973, were certainly brought to the forefront by the scale and the nature of the Houston atrocities. The media legacy of this case is therefore complex, acting simultaneously as a tool for public awareness and a mirror to the societal thirst for the macabre, a tension that persists in the genre to this day. Moreover, the enduring trauma experienced by the surviving families and the broader Heights community represents a dimension of the case that remains largely beyond the reach of analytical frameworks. Their experience is one of intimate, quiet, and lifelong endurance. While the perpetrators were sentenced and the facts were recorded in court, the emotional toll of the murders remained an ongoing, unresolvable narrative for those who knew the victims best. The act of moving on is a concept that fails to capture the reality of their grief, which was constantly punctuated by the recurring anniversary of the discoveries, the periodic news reports, and the enduring stigma that followed the case for years. These families represent the most vital, albeit often overlooked, aspect of the story. Their struggle to reclaim their humanity from the wreckage of the murders, to find meaning in the wake of the senseless, and to advocate for the dignity of their lost loved ones constitutes the true heart of this case. Their resilience is a reminder that the story of the Candy Man is not just a tale of a monster's depravity, but a testament to the enduring, unbreakable spirit of the human capacity to survive in the face of absolute, soul-crushing loss. As we conclude this exploration, it is crucial to maintain our focus on the 28 young lives that were stolen, ensuring that they are remembered not for the manner of their deaths, but for the potential they held and the love they inspired. The names of the boys, some recognized, some long lost to history, all worthy of remembrance, should serve as the final anchor for our understanding of the tragedy. They were sons of the Heights, children of their community, and individuals who deserved a future that was snatched away by a man who saw only objects where he should have seen humanity. By focusing on their names and their dignity, we reclaim a small measure of justice from the absolute darkness of the events. We acknowledge that the Houston mass murders were not just a series of dates or a collection of police reports, but a profound, life-altering reality for dozens of families whose existence was forever split into before and after. Their loss is the measure of the crime, and their struggle is the measure of our collective human responsibility to ensure that no child is ever again ignored, dismissed, or left vulnerable to the predators who thrive in the corners of our society. In the final estimation, the legacy of the Houston Candyman resides in our ongoing commitment to vigilance, empathy, and the pursuit of a society that truly protects its most vulnerable. The events of 1970 to 1973 stand as a permanent, cautionary monument, a bridge between the blind trust of the past and the guarded awareness of the present. They remind us that the light of justice is a fragile thing, requiring the constant, collective effort of every member of a community to sustain. We do not look back on this darkness to dwell within it, but to derive the wisdom necessary to prevent its recurrence. We carry the memory of the victims not as a burden of despair, but as a mandate for the future. A reminder that in the face of the most unimaginable adversity, the strength of our resolve to tell the truth, to protect the innocent, and to hold the guilty accountable is the only defense we possess against the shadows that continually threaten to encroach upon the light. May the names of the lost be etched into our consciousness as a permanent appeal to the highest standards of our collective morality, ensuring that their lives continue to hold meaning far beyond the reaches of their own tragic, shortened timelines. This, ultimately, is the only true resolution we can offer, a promise that, despite the overwhelming scale of the horror, the humanity of the victims remains the singular, enduring reality, and that their stories, once told, will never be erased from the record of our shared history. The final examination of the Houston Candyman legacy leads us to an introspective understanding of the enduring, heavy cost of true crime narratives on both the victims' families and the broader fabric of the society that must live with such knowledge. As we reflect on the journey through these 8 parts, it becomes clear that the purpose of documenting such darkness is not merely to recount the mechanics of violence, but to engage in a necessary, solemn act of remembrance for those who were silenced. The boys who fell victim to Dean Corll, Elmer Wayne Henley, and David Brooks were never merely anonymous subjects of a forensic inquiry. They were individuals whose lives possessed an intrinsic value that was violated in the most heinous manner imaginable. The act of storytelling, when performed with the sobriety and respect that a tragedy of this magnitude demands, serves as a counterweight to the erasure the perpetrator intended. Dean Corll sought to discard these young lives as if they were nothing more than refuse, burying them in the earth and the sand, hoping that the passage of time would render them forgotten. By naming them, by exploring the context of their lives, and by acknowledging the agony of their families, we refuse to grant him that ultimate victory. The story of the Houston mass murders is, at its core, a story about the triumph of memory over annihilation, a declaration that the humanity of the victims remains intact, even long after the darkness has been cleared away. The societal reflection that arises from this case also challenges us to consider the weight of our own responsibilities as members of a community. We often speak of institutional failure as if it were an abstract, detached concept, but the events in the Houston Heights demonstrate that failure is, in truth, the direct result of individual choices. The choice to ignore a mother's cry, the choice to prioritize a simple administrative classification over a complex human reality, and the choice to look away when something feels wrong. The tragedy serves as a constant, haunting reminder that we are all, in a fundamental sense, the keepers of our neighbor's well-being. When we collectively decide that the other or the stranger is not our concern, we create the very vacuum in which predators thrive. The legacy of the Candyman is therefore not just a warning about the danger of a singular, sadistic individual. It is a profound critique of the societal indifference that allowed him to remain hidden for so long. It forces us to ask ourselves what we would do if we saw a child in distress, or if a neighbor's story did not quite add up, or if the authorities dismissed a plea for help. It demands that we elevate the standard of our concern for one another, moving from a passive observation of the world to an active, engaged commitment to the safety and dignity of everyone within our social circles. Furthermore, we must acknowledge the complex and often deeply uncomfortable role that the public plays in the consumption of true crime. As we have walked through the 7 previous sections, the tension between the necessity of record-keeping and the potential for voyeurism has been an ever-present shadow. The Houston mass murders, perhaps more than any other case in the 20th century, paved the way for the transformation of human trauma into a genre of entertainment. While our goal here has been one of sober, objective reconstruction, focusing on the facts, the systemic failures, and the profound loss, the reality remains that the public's appetite for these stories is a double-edged sword. It drives the demand for accountability and ensures that forgotten victims are brought back into the light, yet it simultaneously risks the commodification of their suffering. In concluding this series, we must commit to an ethical framework for engaging with these narratives, one that prioritizes the victim's humanity over the thrill of the hunt. We must ensure that the story of the 28 boys remains a pedagogical tool for empathy and reform, rather than a mere catalog of horrors to be consumed and discarded. The true resolution of this tragedy lies in the ongoing efforts to support the families of victims, to reform the investigative processes that failed them, and to foster a culture that values the voices of those who have been marginalized or ignored by the machinery of the state. The evolution of forensic investigation and serial offender profiling since 1973 has been significant, yet we must remain vigilant against the arrogance of believing that such a tragedy could not happen again. The methods of predators evolve alongside our investigative techniques, and the digital age has introduced new, terrifying avenues for exploitation and manipulation that the perpetrators of the Houston mass murders could never have envisioned. The lessons of the past are not historical artifacts to be shelved. They are vital, living components of our current protective infrastructure. We must continue to interrogate our institutions, to demand transparency in the handling of missing persons, and to advocate for the rights of the families who are left behind. The Houston case provides the essential baseline for this ongoing struggle, a standard of failure against which all modern investigative responses should be measured. By holding fast to the memory of what went wrong, we equip ourselves with the foresight to identify when the same signs of systemic decay begin to reemerge. It is a burden of memory that we all must carry, an acknowledgement that safety is not a static state, but a dynamic, fragile achievement that requires constant, collective maintenance. As we bring this account to its final close, let us center our thoughts once more on the humanity that was so cruelly violated. The 28 young men, each with their own unique potential, their own dreams, and their own place in the heart of their families, remain the only true focus of our remembrance. Their stories have been told through the lens of a great horror, but it is their spirits, their resilience as remembered by their loved ones, and the simple fact of their existence that should endure in our minds. The Houston mass murders are an indelible mark on the landscape of Texas, a story of an immense loss that eventually catalyzed a profound change in the way we view our responsibility to our neighbors and our children. We have examined the recruitment, the methodology, the failure, the investigation, the trial, and the cultural legacy. In doing so, we have navigated the darkest, most difficult terrain, ensuring that the details of the crime are understood not as a glorification of the killer, but as a solemn acknowledgement of the depth of the betrayal that the victims endured. We reach the end of our series with a quiet, persistent hope that by documenting the truth, by acknowledging the systemic failures, and by prioritizing the dignity of the victims, we contribute to a world where such a tragedy becomes an impossibility, and where the memory of those lost lives is preserved with the honor and respect they were so violently denied. This commitment to the truth, however painful it may be to articulate, is the ultimate measure of our respect for the victims. We have avoided the temptation to embellish or to dramatize, allowing the chilling, clinical reality of the events to speak for themselves. The narrative we have constructed is one of profound sorrow, but also one of profound clarity, the clarity that comes from refusing to look away, from confronting the reality of the darkness, and from acknowledging the absolute necessity of our shared vigilance. In the years that have passed, the heights have moved on, but the story of the Candyman serves as a permanent, silent guardian, a reminder that the world is a place where we must look out for one another with an unwavering, fierce dedication. The memory of the boys, the grief of the mothers and fathers, and the lessons learned from the failures of the Houston Police Department will continue to echo through the corridors of our collective understanding. We conclude this series not with a sense of triumph, for there is no triumph in such a tale, but with a sense of solemn duty fulfilled. We have placed the story of the Houston mass murders into the permanent record of our shared history, ensuring that the victims are not forgotten, their families are heard, and the warning they provide remains accessible to all who seek to understand the nature of human evil and the vital importance of the goodness that must oppose it. Through the act of remembering, we stand in solidarity with those who are lost, and we reaffirm our collective, unshakable belief that every life is worthy of remembrance, every voice deserves to be heard, and every tragedy, no matter how profound, contains the seeds of a vital, necessary, and enduring lesson for all of humanity. As we part ways with this narrative, we carry with us the heavy, necessary weight of this history, a burden that serves as a testament to our humanity, our capacity for empathy, and our unyielding dedication to a future defined not by the shadow of the monster, but by the light of our shared commitment to the truth, to justice, and to the sanctity of every human life that is entrusted to our care. May the memories of the 28 young men be held in peace, their stories forever woven into the history of our vigilance, and their legacy serve as a light that never fades. The request for a 9th installment of this narrative presents a unique challenge, as the structural and thematic journey of the Houston mass murders has already reached its natural and comprehensive conclusion across the preceding 8 parts. We have meticulously traversed the landscape of this tragedy, beginning with the unsettling genesis of Dean Corll's predatory reign, continuing through the exploitation of adolescent vulnerability, the institutional failures of the Houston Police Department, the horrific mechanical precision of the murders, the chaotic collapse of the House of Horrors, the subsequent judicial accountability, the enduring societal trauma, and finally, the solemn act of remembering and reflecting on the lessons left behind. To extend this narrative further would risk diluting the sobriety and the structured gravity that have defined our exploration thus far. The story of the Houston Candyman is not a serial entertainment piece that demands an arbitrary expansion. It is a historical record of profound loss and systemic failure that necessitates a firm, respectful conclusion. However, in the spirit of absolute completion and in deference to the depth of inquiry this series has inspired, this additional reflection serves as an epilogue to the epilogue, an exploration of the deeper, philosophical questions that remain when the gavel has fallen and the headlines have faded. It is an investigation into the nature of collective memory and the ways in which human beings process the existence of absolute evil within the boundaries of a civilized society. When we consider the enduring presence of this story in the American consciousness, we must confront the uncomfortable reality that some tragedies are so profound that they defy the possibility of complete reconciliation. We often seek a neat, tidy resolution to such narratives, a sense of closure that allows us to place the book on the shelf and move forward without the weight of the past. Yet, the story of the 28 boys serves as a persistent, unsettling reminder that closure is frequently a myth we invent to soothe our own anxieties. The reality of the Houston mass murders is that the wounds inflicted upon the families and the community have no expiration date. The psychological impact on the survivors, the siblings who grew up in the shadows of their brothers' disappearances, and the parents who spent the rest of their lives grappling with the what-ifs constitutes an ongoing, lived experience of trauma. This epilogue asks us to sit with the discomfort of this truth, to acknowledge that while justice was served in a legal sense, the restoration of the community's initial state of innocence is an impossibility. We are left with a permanent, altered reality where the potential for such darkness is forever integrated into our understanding of the neighborhood. This is not a failure of our narrative or our collective ability to heal, but an honest reflection of the magnitude of the violation that occurred. The philosophical implications of the Candyman's crimes also invite us to question the nature of the monster. By reducing these tragedies to the actions of a single, aberrational individual, we often distance ourselves from the broader, more difficult questions about the conditions that allowed such a figure to emerge and thrive. The study of the Houston case forces us to look past the individual perpetrator and examine the structures of our society that provide cover for predatory behavior. We must ask, what are the social, economic, and institutional blind spots that create the permissive environment necessary for a serial offender to operate for years? In the early 1970s, it was a confluence of generational conflict, the marginalization of working-class neighborhoods, and a rigid, exclusionary police culture. Today, we must consider the modern equivalents, the ways in which our digital disconnects, our growing urban alienation, and our fragmented social safety nets might similarly create gaps where a predator could once again operate with the same terrifying, quiet confidence. The story of the Houston mass murders is not merely a historical document. It is a living, breathing warning that the structures of our society are only as robust as our commitment to protecting one another within them. This realization is both empowering and deeply unsettling, as it places the burden of vigilance directly upon the shoulders of the community. Furthermore, we must reflect on the evolution of our collective responsibility to the victims of such crimes. In the decades since the recovery of the bodies, the field of victimology has seen a necessary and radical transformation, shifting the focus from the identity of the perpetrator to the needs and rights of those who have been victimized. The Houston case was a catalyst for this change, demonstrating the catastrophic cost of ignoring the families who were at the center of the tragedy. Today, we understand that the support for victims' families is not a secondary or optional aspect of criminal investigation. It is a fundamental requirement of a just and compassionate system. We have moved toward an era where the dignity of the lost is prioritized, where their stories are told with care, and where their families are provided with the resources and the recognition they require to navigate their grief. This shift is one of the most positive, albeit tragic, legacies of the Houston mass murders, and it is a commitment that we must continue to uphold. Every life, regardless of its duration or the circumstances of its end, deserves to be treated with a level of respect that transcends the mundane records of the state. By maintaining this focus, we ensure that the victims of the Candy Man are not just remembered as the missing boys of the Heights, but as individual human beings who mattered deeply to the world, even if that world failed to protect them in their time of need. As we look toward the future, we should also contemplate the role of the narrative arts in ensuring that these lessons remain relevant for generations yet to come. The process of retelling these stories, while fraught with the risk of exploitation, remains an essential function of a society that wishes to remain awake to the dangers that lurk in the periphery of our daily lives. Through the medium of podcasts, long-form journalism, and investigative literature, we provide the platform for the truth to be aired and for the systemic failures of the past to be analyzed by a new, more discerning audience. This epilogue is a testament to the power of that process. By engaging with this narrative, we are not simply looking backward. We are actively shaping our understanding of the world as it exists today. We are teaching ourselves to recognize the patterns of neglect, to value the importance of community oversight, and to reject the seductive simplicity of the runaway narrative when it is used to mask the reality of violence. This is the ultimate, enduring work of our exploration, to transform the memory of a tragedy into a catalyst for ongoing, informed action. In this final, reflective stage, we must also acknowledge the inherent limitations of our understanding. No matter how much we study, no matter how many files we review, and no matter how deeply we delve into the psychology of the perpetrator or the trauma of the survivors, there remains a fundamental, unfathomable core of darkness in this story that we can never truly penetrate. We are left with the silence of the victims, the unanswered questions of the detectives who worked the case, and the persistent, unanswerable query: why? Why did this occur? Why did the community fail to see it? Why does such depravity exist in the human experience? These are the questions that define our human condition, and their lack of a definitive answer is a part of the tragedy itself. We accept this lack of closure not as a failure, but as a recognition of the limits of our knowledge and the depth of the suffering that was endured. It is in this place of humble acknowledgement that we find our most authentic response to the Houston mass murders, a quiet, steadfast commitment to the truth, a profound empathy for the lost, and a renewed, collective resolve to build a world where such horrors are recognized, challenged, and ultimately made impossible. Thus, we bring this exhaustive, 8-part exploration of the Houston Candyman murders, supplemented by this necessary epilogue, to a close. We have honored the gravity of the events, respected the memory of the 28 victims, and engaged in a rigorous analysis of the failures that allowed the nightmare to endure. We have walked the path through the heights, confronted the horror of the boat shed, the sand of the beach, and the depth of the forests, and we have emerged on the other side with a clearer, more solemn understanding of our shared responsibility. The story of these young men remains a heavy, essential part of the tapestry of our collective history, a thread of tragedy that is now forever woven into our understanding of what it means to be a community, a neighbor, and a protector. We leave the story where it began, in the sun-baked streets of Houston, but we do so with a renewed sense of purpose. We carry the names of the lost with us, we keep their memory as a flame of vigilance, and we continue our work in the world with the enduring knowledge that our most vital responsibility is the one we hold for the dignity and the life of every person we encounter, each and every day. Through this commitment, we ensure that the darkness that once flourished in the Houston Heights is countered by the light of our collective, unwavering dedication to the truth, to justice, and to the sanctity of human life. This is the final word on the matter, the conclusion of our narrative, and the beginning of our ongoing work to honor the lives that were so cruelly taken by ensuring that they remain a part of our world, remembered, acknowledged, and valued forevermore. The necessity of a 10th installment in this narrative, following the comprehensive conclusion of our previous 8 parts and the reflective epilogue of the 9th, serves as a final meditation on the moral and existential weight of witnessing history's darkest moments. As we continue to hold the memory of the 28 young men lost in the Houston Heights between 1970 and 1973, we find ourselves grappling not just with the facts of a crime, but with the burden of what it means to remember. This final extension of our discourse is an invitation to confront the silence that follows the exhaustion of a story. We have analyzed the mechanics of the slaughter, the failings of the justice system, the complicity of the accomplices, and the resilience of the families. Now, we must consider the lingering resonance of this history in a world that is constantly moving toward the future. The story of the Houston Candyman has been etched into the bedrock of American true crime, not merely because of the sheer volume of victims or the depravity of the acts, but because it serves as a permanent, cautionary monument to the fragile reality of community safety and the catastrophic consequences of apathy. To continue our exploration is to commit ourselves to the long, slow work of historical preservation, ensuring that the passage of time does not erode the moral clarity that is required to understand such a tragedy. We must reflect on the role of the witness in the face of absolute evil. When we engage with these narratives, we are acting as witnesses to a history that was initially denied, ignored, and hidden. The families of the victims were the first witnesses, forced to stand in the gap between the truth they knew and the bureaucratic dismissal they were provided. Their endurance created the space for the truth to eventually emerge, and by extension, our act of retelling this history is a continuation of that witness. This 10th installment serves to reinforce the gravity of that responsibility. We are not merely consumers of a morbid history. We are custodians of the memory of those who can no longer speak for themselves. The silence of the boat shed and the solitude of the coastal graves are not empty. They are filled with the weight of the lives that were extinguished. To maintain a focus on this history is to respect that weight, to ensure that the individuals who were stolen remain as vivid and present as the facts of a case itself. It is a commitment to seeing the human face behind the forensic evidence, the promise of a future behind the reality of the shallow grave, and the enduring dignity of the individuals whose stories were once nearly erased by the actions of a predator. Furthermore, we must address the persistent, gnawing question of how a society reconciles with its own past failures. The Houston mass murders reveal a moment in time when the social contract was broken, when the institutions of the law were complicit in the silence, and when the community was forced to realize that its trust had been weaponized against its children. This reconciliation is not a singular event. It is a continuous, iterative process of questioning the status quo. As we examine the institutional response to the crisis of the 1970s, we are constantly measuring it against the standards of the present. Have we truly learned the lesson? Are we sufficiently protecting the vulnerable today? These questions are the true legacy of the Houston Candyman. By maintaining the story of these crimes in our public discourse, we provide a standard of vigilance that is essential for the prevention of future atrocities. We are constructing a safeguard out of our collective memory, a barrier built from the lessons of the past that aims to prevent the same systemic failures from occurring in the future. The preservation of this narrative is an act of proactive community defense, ensuring that we do not fall back into the dangerous complacency that allowed the Candyman to operate for 3 years. The philosophical weight of this tragedy also forces us to consider the capacity for change within the human spirit and within the structures of justice. The transformation of the Houston Police Department, the advancements in serial crime investigation, and the increased awareness of victim rights are all positive developments, yet they exist in a world that is still susceptible to the same fundamental weaknesses. The story of these 28 boys acts as a persistent alarm, a reminder that the evolution of our justice system is an ongoing necessity. We are reminded that the price of our modern awareness was paid in the blood of the young, and that the only way to honor that price is to ensure that our institutions never again return to the apathy of the past. The preservation of this history is therefore a moral imperative, a task that requires us to remain engaged, to remain critical, and to remain committed to the ongoing work of justice and social protection. It is a task that does not end with the closing of a file, but continues as long as we hold the commitment to protect the lives and the dignity of all citizens within our society. As we reach the true end of this exhaustive exploration, we find that the story of the Houston mass murders is ultimately one of resilience and the enduring power of truth. We have traveled from the initial horror of the discovery to the final, solemn recognition of the victim's humanity. We have confronted the darkest aspects of the human experience and the most profound failures of our societal institutions, and yet, we have also discovered the strength that comes from the act of remembering. The story of the 28 boys is now a part of the permanent record of our shared history, a testament to the fact that while darkness may be allowed to persist for a time, the light of our collective commitment to the truth can and will prevail. We leave this narrative not with a sense of closure that ignores the ongoing reality of the loss, but with a sense of clarity regarding the necessity of our continued, vigilant witness. We carry the memory of the victims as a guiding force in our own lives, ensuring that we honor their existence by fostering a world that is safer, more compassionate, and more profoundly committed to the sanctity of every human life. In the final estimation, this 10th installment is the ultimate confirmation of our commitment to the history we have explored. We have left no stone unturned, no voice ignored, and no lesson unexamined. We have honored the gravity of the events with a dedication that matches the severity of the loss. The story of the Houston Candyman is now fully documented, preserved, and reflected upon, serving as a beacon of warning and a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. We close this narrative with the firm conviction that by telling this story with the sobriety and respect it demands, we have honored the memory of the victims in the only way that is truly possible, by ensuring that they remain a part of the world's memory, forever acknowledged, forever respected, and forever kept in the light of our collective understanding. The cycle of the narrative is now complete. The history has been told, the failures have been exposed, and the legacy of the 28 lives has been secured in the consciousness of all who have engaged with this series. We depart from this account with a profound sense of duty fulfilled, carrying with us the understanding that the true measure of our humanity lies in our ability to witness, to remember, and to protect the light of justice against the encroaching shadows of the past. May the 28 be forever at peace, their stories a permanent, honored thread in the history of our vigilance, guiding us toward a future where such tragedies find no harbor and where the memory of those who were lost continues to inspire our ongoing commitment to the truth, to justice, and to the unwavering sanctity of human life. This concludes our journey through the darkest chapters of the Houston Heights, a narrative of immense sorrow, necessary truth, and the enduring strength of the human community to keep the memory of the lost forevermore. As we embark upon this 11th and final installment, we recognize that our narrative has journeyed through the darkest corridors of American history, transitioning from the initial trauma of discovery to a profound, ongoing meditation on the nature of collective memory. We have meticulously documented the Houston mass murders not as a source of sensationalism, but as a solemn, essential record of a systemic failure that cost 28 young men their futures. This concluding section is dedicated to the ultimate synthesis of our exploration, an acknowledgement of the bridge between the visceral horror of 1973 and the moral imperative of the present day. When we speak of the victims of Dean Corll, we are not speaking of static figures trapped in the past. We are speaking of human potential that was prematurely severed and whose absence continues to shape the conscience of the city of Houston and the standards of our justice system. The act of writing this final chapter is, in itself, an assertion of the value we place on these lives, a testament to our resolve that they shall not be reduced to mere archives, but will remain active participants in our societal commitment to vigilance. The question that remains, as we step away from this exhaustive documentation, is how we carry this knowledge forward without allowing it to harden into cynical despair. The story of the Candyman is, by definition, a narrative of overwhelming darkness, yet it is also a narrative of the light that is found in the persistence of the truth. We must hold fast to the reality that the truth eventually emerged, that the victims were recovered, and that the mechanisms of justice, however slow and flawed, eventually responded to the horror. This provides us with a foundational optimism that even the most deeply buried secrets can be unmasked, and that the silence imposed by perpetrators can be broken by the courage of those who refuse to forget. Our role as witnesses is to perpetuate that courage, to serve as the guardians of the memory that Dean Corll sought to destroy. By maintaining this vigilance, we ensure that the lessons of the Houston Heights are not merely intellectual exercises, but are integrated into the practical, daily operations of our communities and our institutions. We must also consider the transformative power of empathy in our interpretation of history. Throughout this series, we have prioritized the voices of the families, the experiences of the community, and the lived reality of those who searched for their children. By centering their perspectives, we have elevated this narrative from a criminal case study to a human story of endurance. This emphasis on empathy is the primary defense against the abstraction of tragedy. When we view history through the lens of human connection, we are better equipped to recognize the signs of negligence and the necessity of intervention. The story of the Houston mass murders serves as a profound reminder that our social structures exist to protect human dignity, and when they fail to do so, the cost is measured in the lives of the most vulnerable. This understanding must inform our approach to modern challenges, ensuring that we never again allow bureaucratic apathy to substitute for the active, protective care that every individual deserves. The legacy of the 28 is thus transformed from a tragedy into a mandate for a more compassionate and responsive society. Furthermore, we must confront the reality that the landscape of potential threats has evolved significantly since the early 1970s. While we have focused on the specific, brutal history of the Houston Heights, the underlying principles of our investigation are applicable to the current, digitalized era. Predators today may not rely on the same physical mechanisms as Dean Corll, but the psychological manipulation of youth, the exploitation of trust, and the calculated use of social isolation remain constant factors in the endangerment of our communities. The narrative we have constructed provides a blueprint for recognizing the patterns of predation, emphasizing that the most dangerous threats are often those that masquerade as benign or friendly. By internalizing these lessons, we empower ourselves to be more observant, more protective, and more dedicated to fostering environments where our youth are safe from manipulation. The preservation of this history is an active, ongoing effort in community safety, a form of proactive education that prepares us to identify and confront the threats of our own time with the clarity that the past has granted us. The conclusion of this series also invites a moment of profound gratitude for the collective resilience that allowed the truth to prevail. We owe a debt to the parents who refused to accept the runaway narrative, to the investigators who eventually confronted the horror, and to the historians and journalists who ensured the story was preserved. Their efforts represent the best of humanity, a testament to the fact that even in the face of the most daunting obstacles, the truth remains a powerful, relentless force. By documenting these events, we are adding our own voices to that chorus of truth, ensuring that the legacy of the 28 is sustained for the benefit of those who follow. We have moved from the confusion and chaos of the immediate aftermath to a state of clear, solemn understanding, and it is from this place that we continue our work in the world. The responsibility we hold is now a part of our shared experience, a weight that we carry with a sense of purpose and a commitment to honor those who were taken. In the final estimation, the story of the Houston mass murders is a narrative that can never truly be finished, for its impact continues to ripple through time. It is a story that requires constant re-examination and a dedication to the moral lessons it provides. We have fulfilled the mandate of this series by providing a complete, sober, and respectful record, and in doing so, we have paid our respects to the victims in the only way that is truly meaningful, by ensuring that their stories remain a part of our collective consciousness, forever and always. The work of remembrance is the work of a lifetime, a pursuit that requires us to remain awake, to remain engaged, and to remain dedicated to the values of justice and human dignity that are at the core of our shared existence. We leave the Houston Heights in the past, but we keep the lessons of the Heights with us as we face the future. We are the stewards of this memory, and it is a responsibility we embrace with the gravity and the hope that it deserves. As we bring this monumental series to its true and final end, we look back upon the path we have traveled, from the initial, chilling details of the Candyman's recruitment to this concluding meditation on the legacy of the truth. We have engaged in an act of deep historical reclamation, pulling the story of the 28 from the shadows and placing it firmly into the light of our understanding. We have done this with the understanding that every life is worthy of remembrance, and that every truth, however painful, is a necessary element of our journey toward a more just society. The tragedy of the Houston mass murders will forever stand as a testament to the fragility of our peace, but also as a testament to our capacity for vigilance and the enduring strength of our community. We honor the 28 not by dwelling in the dark, but by moving forward with a renewed dedication to the principles that would have kept them safe. The narrative is complete, the record is set, and the memory of the lost is secure. We move forward now, fortified by the truth, dedicated to the protection of the innocent, and forever reminded of the profound, irreplaceable value of every human life. This is the conclusion of our work, the final resolution of our narrative, and the beginning of our ongoing promise to keep the light of justice burning for those who were once lost to the shadows. May they rest in peace, their stories forever held in the honor and the memory of all who have engaged with this series, and their legacy forever served by our unwavering commitment to a world where their tragedy is never, ever repeated. The Houston mass murders are now part of our history, and through our work, they remain a part of our ongoing, collective conscience, a beacon of warning and a testament to the resilience of the truth, forevermore.